October of 1991. The death of the Master System in the United States was a foregone conclusion at this point, with Sega fully behind the Genesis due to now having proper competition in the way of the just-released Super Nintendo, which had made its debut the previous August. But Sega still had some Master System 2 inventory out there to sell, and Christmas season was fast approaching. To try to help move those Master System 2s, Sega decided to release one last game in the United States, which famously was just product originally destined for the United Kingdom, but diverted to American retailers, with a replacement barcode sticker on the packaging for use with point-of-sale systems on this side of the pond. And that game was, of course, Running Battle, an action game clearly inspired by other titles in the arcade scene at the time, and with a name like that, of course kids would be all about grabbing a Master System to play it on, if maybe Santa's pockets weren't quite deep enough for a Genesis, Super Nintendo, or that weird bonk console with only one controller port. Okay, of course I'm kidding, it was the Master System port of Sonic the Hedgehog that Sega relied on to be the last release on the console in the United States, and to attempt to push out the remaining Master System 2 inventory from retailers, with the hope being that the 8-bit version of the game could move even just a fraction as well as its revolutionary 16-bit brother. Was it successful at that? However, I should probably pause for a second because I'm sure that there's some of you out there that don't know me and just randomly got dropped here due to searching for Sylvester Stallone's upcoming Rocky sequel, where Rocky makes the mistake of ordering a cheesesteak but daring to ask for provolone instead of Cheese Whiz. And, well, you can see how well that worked out. Hi, my name is Dave, and welcome to Zilog and Moto, the channel where, rather than try to remind everyone that the only thing that Cheese Whiz is good for is a throwaway joke in the Blues Brothers, I'm actually instead out to collect and review the nearly 1,280 or so titles released in the English language for the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega or Mega CD as the case may be, and finally the 32X. Basically, if I can plug it into a Genesis either by itself or with some sort of add-on, and be able to read what's up on the screen, I'm trying to get a copy of it and review it for posterity, with both looks at that original packaging and gameplay captured from original hardware whenever possible. In all seriousness, today's review is for the game Running Battle, and as mentioned, it made its first appearance on the Master System in Europe in October of 1991, with a Brazilian version coming a few months later. The Master System was still alive and well in those regions at that point, so it made sense for the console to still get original titles that only appeared on that console and nowhere else. And having said that, this is a unique title in that regard, being developed and published by Sega and not being a port of an arcade game or appearing on the Master System's portable little brother, the Game Gear. So what exactly is this original title? What type of arcade action are we getting here? Is this a diamond in the rough when it comes to the Master System library? Or is there a reason why this game did not make it to the United States in any form? Well, we shall see, but first a look at the package. Okay, and this is my copy of Running Battle for the Master System. Not exactly sure when I picked this one up, but I'm pretty sure that I ordered it off of eBay at some point, probably with a few other European titles to save on shipping. From a condition perspective, you can't get much cleaner than this, with the outer cover being immaculate, including the hang tab at the top, which I think has been missing on the last few reviews. And then the inner cover looking fantastic as well, with no water damage, sun bleaching, or edge wear anywhere. And the manual and cartridge are near mint as well, as you'll see in a minute. I'll definitely be keeping this copy for the collection, but if you decide you want one for yourself, complete versions of the game are currently going for around $30 or so on price charting. As far as the front cover goes, this has some interesting art. Not bad, mind you, but maybe a little confusing as to what's going on. I'm assuming that guy in red is your character, and you're going up against all the enemies in green, and clearly running into battle. So I suppose there's some points for being a bit on the nose there. I'm not sure what's going on with the exploding robot in the middle, or of your character striking a pose in the background, but again, not bad, and definitely looks to be a very actiony title going along with that label in the upper left-hand corner. The The one thing that I'm not crazy about is the title. If you look closely, you can easily tell that it's very pixelated, as if it was just lifted directly from the title screen assets. Not sure why they did that, but it was clearly deliberate, as the same logo was used on the spine of the game as well. It's unfortunate because it mars what was otherwise some nice hand-drawn art on the front of the box, and is pretty distracting. As mentioned, with the only other release of the game being Brazilian, there's not a whole lot to talk about as far as different covers go, as that version uses the same art as well, but instead they used the basic block text for the title, and while I wouldn't necessarily call that an improvement, it does show how much cleaner it looks without that title art. Flipping over the back, and we've got a pretty standard European release rear cover, with not 6, not 7, but 8 languages that they had to make room for on the back, which of course means that there's not exactly a whole lot of room for exposition about the game. Instead, all we get is, a neighboring city has fallen into the hands of the sinister M and his soldiers of the darkness. Get inside the dark zone and punch, kick, and blast your way through to the final conflict. Well, that's about as late 80s, early 90s, straight-to-video action movies you can get, so clearly they've got a theme going. And I suppose I can't rag on that too badly, as I've certainly played and enjoyed plenty of arcade games from that era that had plots that gave you less to go on than that. But really, naming the bad guy M? Is this some sort of alternate history James Bond game? Opening up the package, and as I mentioned, the manual and cartridge look fantastic, with the manual having some slight imperfections, but overall looking well taken care of. The manual unfortunately has one of the layouts that I hate with these, where rather than separate language sections, you get all 8 at the same time. The manual does explain the story a bit further, with summaries of each of the 5 levels included, which is nice, but still leaves some questions that I hope will be explained through playing the game. There's also art and screenshots included, which I like, but unfortunately the way the manual is formatted, you're going to need a magnifying glass to be able to see what's going on in some of those, which is too bad because I really would have liked to have seen some more of those comic pages spelling out the game's backstory. Okay, that's the package. Let's start running and battling and seeing just how good your character's cardio is. As mentioned, if you spend the time to read the manual, assuming you actually have a copy that still includes it, you'll be better informed about the plot of the game than just what the back of the box gives you, but just slightly. Apparently you play as the confusingly named Detective Sergeant Gray. I guess maybe in other parts of the world it's normal for police to have 2 titles, but here in the US, it would definitely be more standard to either refer to Gray as either Detective Gray or Sergeant Gray, but not both. Regardless, clearly Gray is a detective of rank sergeant, whose partner, and or brother, it's not really clear, Sergeant Brody, was killed when he started to look into a mysterious character named M, whose crime organization, the Soldiers of the Darkness, have taken over a local town, with it being now referred to as the Dark Zone, due to the soldiers' presence there. Gray, like any stereotypical action movie protagonist, is filled with anger at the death of his partner and is now out for revenge, having one purpose: to cut down each and every soldier of the darkness on his way to M himself, to clean up the Dark Zone and get vengeance for Brody. I've got to be honest, it's not a bad start for an action game, even if it's a little bit tropey. But that's just the plot behind the game. What about the game itself? Well, as you might expect, you're in control of Detective Sergeant Gray, and the one man's war against a crime syndicate isn't just a plot point, it's also a gameplay element, as the game is decidedly just one player. Your entry into the Dark Zone begins with your introduction to the Soldiers of the Darkness on some rough streets that give off a very slight Streets of Rage vibe, and considering that Streets of Rage made its debut just a few months previous, it wouldn't be too surprising to find out that there was some influence from that title. However, that vibe is quickly dashed once you get in control of Gray and start maneuvering around the screen. Or should I say left and right, because maneuvering around would imply that you can move off of the fixed axis that you're on. Due to that lack of movement, instead of a beat 'em up, Running Battle is probably better described as an action title with combat elements, more similar to something like Shinobi. You can punch, kick, crouch, and jump your way across the level, all while having to dispatch some, to be honest, fairly boring enemies on your mission to move to the right side of the screen. Along the way, you can grab a few different power-ups to aid in your fight against the Soldiers of the Darkness. And I swear I'm going to try to avoid saying that name again for the rest of the review because it's not great. And I'm sure that's got to be a translation issue, much like Detective Sergeant Gray. Anyway, the power-ups appear as red boxes as you make your way through the level, with some just coming out of thin air and some appearing after you dispatch an enemy. There's basic power-ups like additional health or extra lives, both of which are of course very important, but then there's also power-ups for your character to help you make it past all of the various enemies. For sidearms, you can grab either a pistol or a rifle, both of which come with a different number of shots. The pistol will come with more bullets and fire faster than the rifle, but do less damage. If you have the option, grabbing either is a no-brainer, as you'll want to try to dispatch enemies before having to rely on hand-to-hand combat to keep your health up. But since you can only have one power-up at a time, sometimes there's a little bit of strategy at play as to when you might want to grab a new weapon. Beyond firearms, there's two more power-ups available, and they're both time-limited since they don't utilize ammo. The first is a super suit, which makes your hand-to-hand combat more powerful and increases your defense, so that you won't take quite so much damage when you're having to get up close and personal with enemies. And it definitely works as advertised. But again, based on the situation and the fact that you can only have one power-up at a time, you may still be better off with one of the weapons instead of the super suit. And the strategy involved in choosing which power-ups you grab and how well you use them is definitely one of the strengths of the game. However, there is also one last power-up, and that is a brief invincibility bonus, which gives you 5 seconds to run through the level, very much emblematic of the game's name, Running Battle. In fact, when you get the invulnerability power-up, that's all you can do, is run towards the level's exit, as there's no jumping or stopping to attack. As awesome as that might seem, being given a way to effectively skip through big chunks of the level, there are some drawbacks to grabbing that ability. The first one is that 5 seconds goes quick, which means you'll want to try to get the most out of it. However, just because it allows you to run over pits, you still need to be careful of where you are when your timer runs out, because the last thing you want to do is be wily coyoting it over a pit when the timer runs out. The other, and to me, larger drawback of the invincibility power-up is that variability to skip through the level. And I'm sure you're probably confused, thinking, well, how could that be a bad thing? Well, if you're skipping through sections of the level, that means you're also skipping out on the rotating gun pods that are in the levels, which is where you'll end up getting a lot of your power-ups from, especially the further that you get in the game. This is bad because every power-up that spawns is random, and you could be technically missing out on extra lives each time you skip a gun. It's definitely up to the player to choose what they think works best for them, but honestly, the more I played it, the more I either skipped those power-ups entirely or just ran the clock out on them so that I didn't miss out on those chances at extra lives. Now, that might seem a bit cheesy to rely on collecting extra lives to make it through the game, but if you were to actually try to play it, I think you'd understand. While combat in the game is relatively simple, it is also a mess. When you rely on hand-to-hand combat, there doesn't seem to be any way to ensure that you hit the bad guys before they hit you. It seemingly just comes down to chance. And to make matters worse, the hitboxes in the game are poorly defined. All those rotating guns that I mentioned that you'll want to make sure you take out to get power-ups, well, good luck trying to hit them with jump kicks, because usually you'll need to aim beside the gun to actually hit it, and even then it still may take a few tries. This is a big part of why you'll want to prioritize getting pistols or rifles when you can, but guess what? When you duck, all you can do is punch, even when holding a gun. That's a move that I totally see all the time in action movies, let me tell you, the hero just kneeling there and punching. And oh, by the way, all those weapons and the supersuit, well, guess what you can't use against the bosses? That's right, for every boss level, for some unknown reason, you discard any power-up you might have had, and just take on the boss barehanded, in some strange honorific statement, because they will have zero problems bringing their weapons to the fight. Other than the weapon issue and the odd hitboxes, I actually don't really have a problem with the bosses. Well, I mean, their placement is a little odd. I mean, the first one is a pirate, and then there's a Billy the Kid wannabe, and I'm not real sure how Captain Brass and a cowboy fit in with a modern gang. But at least the boss fights are original and separate themselves from the rest of the game. They definitely could have done a better job on the translation though, because the third and fourth bosses are named Samurai Man and Miracle Man. Yes, you heard that right. Samurai, not samurai, and Miracle, not miracle. And then both are just man, like they were discarded bosses from Mega Man. And it's too bad because the boss fights are kind of nice. The one with Miracle Man especially, because he ends up pulling bricks off the wall and throwing them at you, which actually has a pretty nice graphical effect for the console. There is one other issue with the bosses though, and that's the fact that you are essentially having to fight Samurai Man, Miracle Man, and then the end boss M and his weird robot tank, which is actually the robot from the front cover of the game, all back to back to back. And if you lose all your lives and have to continue, well, it's back to the beginning of Samurai Man's level. Remember when I said that collecting extra lives was important? Well, this is why. To take a break from complaining about things, I do want to credit the designers with one thing that I think is somewhat nice, and that's the way that the story is presented as you proceed through the levels. Between the levels, and usually after boss fights, there will be breaks where the characters talk to one another, and slowly shed light into what's going on. Also, if you didn't have the manual at the beginning of the game, if you don't press start right away, you'll get a nice scrolling wall of text, again, not unlike the beginning of Streets of Rage, that explains how things got to where they are. Unfortunately, just like with the boss names, there's clearly some translation issues at hand, but if you just treat it like it's a really campy anime, complete with the random heroic rescue of a previously unmentioned female character that is essentially the entire fourth level, it's not so bad. Other than those cutscene breaks, and perhaps the last boss, I've got to be honest, I wasn't overly impressed with the graphics. For a late 1991 game, they were honestly pretty mediocre, and I'm sure the fact that it was only a 2 megabit cartridge did not help matters. Usually when playing Master System games, I feel like graphically that they're almost always superior to NES titles, as they should be, seeing as how it's a more powerful console. But in this case, Running Battle felt like a NES title from 1988. Just something about the art, it had that same vibe, which is clearly not a good thing for a game that came out 3 years later. And to make matters worse, it has the same single-line flicker issues that many other Master System games have when too much is going on the same horizontal area of the screen. Running Battle, much like Basketball Nightmare from way back in Episode 8, is that strange Sega of Japan developed title that was not released in Japan. And I'm not sure if it's for that reason, but there's no actual credits of who worked on the game. However, apparently one guy that did work on the game is Hikoshi Hashimoto, who was apparently responsible for the game's music and sound. I mention this because even though there's lots that I'm not satisfied with the game, the music is not one of those things, and the game actually has a fantastic soundtrack, and one of the better ones that I've heard on the console. Along with the various level tracks, each of the 5 bosses gets their own track as well, and they're all pretty great, and made playing the game enjoyable at least from an audio perspective. When I posted the teaser picture for this review the other day, one of the comments that I got was from Stika, and if you're not familiar with him, you should definitely go check out his channel, as he's produced some great retro gaming content over the years. But anyway, he responded to the picture with, "This is a game that I wish I liked more." And damn if he didn't hit the nail right on the head. This is a game that I too wish I liked more. There's pieces of a cool game here. A plot that, if fleshed out correctly, could have been very action movie worthy, with the twist of a final bad guy that has hypnotic telepathic powers. Action with both hand-to-hand combat and weapons. A fight against hordes of enemies, robots, and unique bosses. and a very cool soundtrack. Unfortunately, it's simply not a good game, and to add insult to injury, if you get lucky with the extra lives, it's very short, to the point to where I almost beat it the first time that I played it. Unfortunately, it takes more than just good ideas to make a good game, so as a result, I'm giving Running Battle only 1 star. Had it came out in the 80s, I might have slightly been more favorable to it, but considering that it came out the same month as Sonic the Hedgehog, yeah, this one just isn't getting it done. Okay, and that is it for Running Battle for the Master System. Oh, what might have been. When I said before that the game gave off 1988 NES vibes, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, just look at the NES library and some of the games that came out in 1988. That's stuff like Renegade, Contra, Double Dragon, Metal Gear, Bionic Commando. I mean, those were some great games on the NES in 1988, not necessarily the Master System in 1991. Oh well, considering the fact that it was a Japanese-developed game aimed at a European Master System audience, I suppose we should be glad that it's part of the library at all. But this is definitely one that you're going to want to try before you buy. Next time on Zilog and Moto, well, it was originally supposed to be Hardball 94, but seeing as how I just reviewed Roger Clemens' MVP Baseball, we're going to push that one back about 2 months or so. See, I'm still looking forward to checking it out with as cool as Hardball 3 was, but I think that that's more than enough baseball for a bit. Instead, I'm going to go with a different accolade title, one that I've never played, but that does have a reputation for its appearances on home computers, many of which dueled over which one had the better port. Well, that's it for Zilog and Moto episode 239. If you liked what you saw here and want to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you are so inclined, as it will help more people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.